Where did you hide the original manuscript? Tell me now!
I swear, Eminence, these copies are all that remain. I merely transcribe them.
The discovery of the Nag Hammadi codices seized the public imagination because it returned voices we thought had vanished. But even before that modern recovery, the idea of Gnostic Gospels had circulated in whispers. Writings that offered a different Jesus, a different salvation, and an alternate map of the divine. To understand why those books were pushed to the margins, hidden, burned, criticized, and erased, we need to listen carefully to what they said and to whom their words posed a threat. Picture a world in which religious truth was not monolithic, but a marketplace of competing teachers. In the first centuries after Jesus, communities across the Eastern Mediterranean debated fiercely about scripture's authority and meaning. The Gnostic writings were not uniform, but they shared common threads. A deep suspicion of the material world, a metaphysics that split spirit and matter, and a promise that salvation came through secret knowledge gnosis available to those who could perceive it. That was an enticing offer to some and an existential threat to others. One immediate flashpoint was Christology, the question of who Jesus was. In many Gnostic texts, Jesus appears less as the obedient son of a creator God and more as a revealer of hidden knowledge. Some Gnostic narratives suggested that the creator of the visible world, what they often called the demiurge, was a lower, ignorant power, not the ultimate divine source. If the creator were flawed or even malevolent, then the moral and cosmic orders established by that creator could be called into question. The implications were profound. Worship, ethics, and the very meaning of salvation could shift dramatically under that alternative picture. Closely related was the matter of ritual and authority. Gnostic groups often privileged inner experience and direct revelation over institutional rites and hierarchical mediation, where a bishop might claim authority by apostolic succession. A visible chain of leadership and liturgical practice. Gnostics leaned into initiation, esoteric teaching, and personal awakening. That model threatened the institutional control that bishops, clergy, and emerging ecclesiastical structures depended upon. If salvation were primarily an inward discovery available to the spiritually awake, the practical necessity of centralized leadership and public rites looked less urgent. Form and language amplified suspicion. Gnostic writings frequently used mythic, symbolic storytelling, multi-level heavens, emanations, and elaborate personifications of divine attributes. To a patristic writer educated in rhetorical and philosophical traditions, such imagery sometimes seemed dangerously speculative or confusing. But to seekers attracted to intimacy with the divine, it was intoxicating. Gnostic texts offered a sense of intimacy and empowerment. You were not merely a congregant, you were a participant in a hidden drama of awakening. That personal promise undercut the authority of public teaching that relied on uniformity and repetition. Political context mattered as well. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, Christianity's relationship with imperial power intensified. The Church began consolidating doctrine in ways that mirrored imperial structures, councils, creeds, and official recognition by civic authority.
The book holds the secrets of our ancestors. It was hidden away many centuries ago, waiting for the right moment to reappear.
The imperative to unify doctrine had practical benefits: social cohesion, legal rights, and political legitimacy. Heterodox movements that claimed alternate revelations or different scriptures complicated that goal. When religious leaders had to speak with one voice to negotiate power with state authorities, pluralism could look like instability or even sedition. Defenders of the emerging orthodoxy reacted forcefully. Writers like Irenaeus, Hippolytus, and Tertullian composed detailed refutations of what they called heresies, quoting Gnostic passages selectively to expose perceived errors. Their polemics framed Gnostics as deceptive, morally suspect, or dangerously speculative. Much of our early knowledge of Gnostic thought comes filtered through these hostile sources, and polemical framing can both persuade and harden public opinion. By labeling and denouncing, defenders of orthodoxy created a narrative. These were not legitimate interpretations, but perversions to be excised. Control over scripture was decisive. Choosing which books would be read in churches, copied by scribes, and circulated widely was a disciplinary act. Once a text was excluded from liturgical use, it lost its main mechanism for survival: repetitive copying and public endorsement. Texts that taught secrecy, questioned the cosmic order, or undermined ecclesial hierarchy were often left out of the emerging canon. Canonization was therefore not a neutral selection of truth, but a historical process shaped by pastoral needs, political considerations, and debates about communal identity. The physical dimension of suppression should not be underestimated. In late antiquity and the medieval era, works judged heretical were sometimes publicly burned. Libraries could be purged, private owners pressured to surrender banned texts. Without active copying and liturgical function, fragile materials like papyrus and parchment simply rotted. Some Gnostic works were likely destroyed outright. Others were hidden in caves, buried, or tucked away in private collections where they survived by accident. Suppression thus operated on two levels: intellectual repudiation and physical elimination. Gender and social structure also influenced marginalization. Gnostic writings often foregrounded feminine metaphors and included women in prominent spiritual roles. Mary Magdalene is a notable example in several texts where she appears as an authoritative disciple. The rise of institutional patriarchy in many Christian circles made such portrayals uncomfortable. Leaders consolidating male clerical authority had an incentive to sideline texts that suggested alternative models of leadership or whose symbolic language elevated feminine aspects of the divine. Marginalizing those writings was part theological dispute and part social reordering. Rumor and moral panic fueled exclusion too. Accusations against Gnostic groups included allegations of sexual licentiousness or cultic excess, whether grounded in fact or invented by rivals. Secretive initiation rites, by their nature, invite suspicion. Sensational claims travel fast and are politically useful when a community needs a boogeyman to rally against. Once scandalous charges gain traction, they make suppression easier to justify in the name of protecting public morals. Intellectual fashion and scholarly bias played a role in later centuries. For a long time, Gnosticism was treated by scholars as a confused, derivative aberration, an interpretation shaped in part by patristic polemics. That interpretive baggage delayed sympathetic readings and slowed the recovery of internal coherence within Gnostic literature. When the Nag Hammadi codices and other finds finally offered primary materials, scholars had to rework deep assumptions, discovering that Gnostic writings are often sophisticated, coherent systems of thought rather than mere theological errors. Yet suppression was rarely total or permanent. Ideas persisted in folk belief, mystical practices, and fringe communities. Some Gnostic concepts were absorbed into later mystical traditions. Others survive as odd refrains in theological margins. Crucially, many Gnostic writings survived because they were hidden sealed in jars, tucked in caves, secreted away by families or collectors who may not even have understood their significance. That act of concealment, whether intentional or pragmatic, became a mode of survival against repeated pressures to erase. Understanding why these Gospels were suppressed matters for us now, because it reshapes our image of early Christianity.
Where did you hide the original manuscript? Tell me now!
I swear, Eminence, these copies are all that remain. I merely transcribe them.
The suppression story reveals a dynamic religious landscape of debates, experiments, and competing authorities. Recovering suppressed texts is therefore not merely an archaeological triumph. It's a corrective to historical forgetting. It forces us to ask which voices we have lost and how institutional power shapes what counts as tradition.
The evidence suggests localized cults with shared motifs, not a singular movement.
But the term Gnosticism implies a
Listening to the Gnostic Gospels today requires nuance. They are not a single movement with a unified agenda. They are diverse, imaginative, and often internally conflicted. They speak in mythic registers that demand interpretive care. But insisting on their complexity doesn't mean excusing every claim or confusing them with later orthodoxies. Instead, it means admitting that our inherited story of Christian origins has gaps, and that those gaps were often carved by conscious decisions about power, authority, and survival.
Let go of the shadows.
Look, the Gospel of Thomas. It says,
Let it be known throughout the diocese that the new canon laws are hereby enacted. All clergy must...
Despite centuries of suppression, Gnostic ideas never entirely vanished. They resurfaced in unexpected corners, the contemplative margins of established faiths, itinerant mystics transmitting oral traditions, and later among intellectuals hungry for alternative metaphysical vocabularies. Suppression is rarely absolute. Beliefs migrate, transform, and reappear when social conditions and appetites for new meaning change. The rediscovery of primary manuscripts in the 20th century therefore reopened conversations that had been muffled for a millennium. One reason Gnostic texts continue to resonate,
As you can see here, the handwriting is typical of a mid-Ptolemaic scribe, suggesting it was written around 200 BCE.
is psychological. Whereas many Orthodox traditions emphasize communal obligation, liturgical practice, and institutional authority, Gnostic literature privileges interior experience and direct knowledge. Passages that speak of inner light, self-recognition, and a lifted veil appeal to people who feel alienated by formal structures or who yearn for an immediate encounter with the sacred. That emphasis on personal awakening can function as spiritual consolation and as an invitation to radical self-reflection, a quality that makes these writings feel profoundly modern to some readers. Scholarly approaches to Gnosticism have shifted markedly in the last century. For a long time, academic accounts echoed the harsh characterizations of church fathers, framing Gnostics as confused sectarians. The recovery of intact Gnostic codices demanded a methodological reset. Scholars began treating these texts on their own terms, analyzing their internal logic, mapping intertextual references, and situating them in local social worlds. This change revealed Gnostic writings as often coherent theological systems, rich in metaphor and intent, rather than as simple theological mistakes to be corrected. Public fascination has been a double-edged sword. Sensational books and documentaries promise hidden gospels and revolutionary secrets, transforming nuanced research into clickbait that sells headlines but flattens complexity. Responsible public engagement, careful exhibitions, well-researched documentaries, and accessible books by qualified scholars offers a healthier model.
The Roman canon must be standardized across the sea.
And the Gallican supplement must be reviewed immediately.
It presents the manuscripts as both material artifacts and interpretive challenges, helping audiences understand what the texts say and how they circulated. Authority and access are central concerns in both ancient and modern contexts. In antiquity, authority was performed through communal recognition. Texts used in public worship were copied and preserved. Texts excluded from liturgy fell into disuse. Today, authority is mediated by museums, academic presses, digital hubs, and curatorial decisions. The democratization of access high-resolution scans, open access translations, and collaborative platforms has widened readership and scholarly collaboration. Yet it also places responsibility on institutions and platforms to provide context and avoid sensational presentation that divorces texts from their historical moorings. Legal and ethical questions about provenance and repatriation have reshaped museum practice. Many manuscripts left Egypt during periods of weak regulation, private trading, or unclear legal status. Modern standards emphasize provenance research, transparency, and cooperative exhibitions with source communities. Negotiations over loans and repatriation underscore that manuscripts are not neutral objects, but are entangled with histories of colonial extraction and market demand. Ethical stewardship now demands collaborative curatorial models and clear acknowledgement of origin. Translation is itself an interpretive act with real consequences. Gnostic texts draw on Greek philosophical vocabulary, Judaic scriptural tropes, and Egyptian idioms. Translators must choose whether to preserve foreign terms, pleroma, pneuma, aeon, demiurge, or to render them into English approximations. Each choice nudges readers toward different understandings. A literal approach preserves the text's strangeness, but may obscure meaning. An adaptive translation clarifies, but risks domestication. Good editions therefore provide apparatus, glosses, and commentary, so readers can see both raw language and interpretive options. Appropriation raises further questions. Modern spiritual movements sometimes borrow Gnostic imagery and ritual phrases for personal practice. While these adaptations can be meaningful for practitioners, scholars warn against decontextualizing rituals that were embedded in communal initiation structures, rites, ethical frameworks, and relationships of transmission mattered. Extracted phrases lose some of their social force and risk turning living traditions into aesthetic or therapeutic miscellany. Concrete case studies illustrate suppression's long shadow. Consider Mary Magdalene. In several Gnostic texts, she appears as a leading disciple who grasps Jesus' hidden teaching and who counsels other followers. That contrasts with later medieval portrayals that emphasized penitence and marginalization. Recovering these alternate portraits has energized feminist theological scholarship and sparked public debate about women's roles in early ministry. Likewise, readings of the Gospel of Thomas that foreground wisdom sayings invite comparisons with Jewish wisdom literature and shift questions away from juridical salvation to ethical insight and contemplative knowing. Museums, educators, and media producers play crucial roles in shaping public understanding. Exhibits that pair facsimiles with accessible interpretive panels allow visitors to appreciate both the physical craft of codices and the complexity of their contents. Public lectures, classroom curricula, and online open courses extend this literacy, helping non-specialists distinguish sensational claims from sober scholarship. Good public programming treats manuscripts as contested objects, beautiful artifacts that also provoke questions about transmission, authority, and cultural memory. Technological advances continue to expand what's possible. Multispectral imaging reveals erased or faded ink. Computational tools assist in reconstructing lacunae and mapping textual relationships, and collaborative digital platforms let scholars annotate and compare variants in real time. These techniques increase access and reveal details invisible to the naked eye, but they also demand careful curation. Digital surrogates should complement, not replace, responsible physical conservation and critical philology. At a deeper level, the story of suppression and recovery teaches lessons about cultural memory and power. The texts that survive into the present do so partly by chance and partly by institutional choice. Recovering suppressed writings invites institutions and readers to ask which voices were excluded from dominant narratives and why. This is not a call to equate all ancient claims, but a corrective that acknowledges the contingency of transmission. History is shaped by decisions about copying, teaching, and authorization. For contemporary listeners, these recovered writings present both challenge and invitation. They demand careful reading, historical imagination, and a willingness to tolerate ambiguity. They compel scholars to refine methodologies, congregations to reflect on inclusion and authority, and interested readers to recognize that religious traditions are plural and contested. Engaging the Gnostic text responsibly means balancing intellectual curiosity with ethical humility, enjoying the strangeness without overstating sensational conclusions. The work is ongoing. Future discoveries, improved imaging, and collaborative research will keep complicating the story. Even now, though, The Gnostic Gospels have reshaped conversations about early Christianity, gender, ritual, and the processes by which some voices gained dominance while others were marginalized. Listening to these recovered voices attentively and critically enriches our historical understanding and reminds us how fragile cultural memory can be.
Allows us to compare the intricate original text with its precise modern translation, shedding
Dada, we must move them tonight.
This cave here, it is the only safe place left. But these are irreplaceable.
Ah, incredible. This is exactly what I was looking for.
A generous donation allowed us to display this artifact, dating back to 1323 BC.
Gnosticism sounds complex, but it's really about seeking that inner knowledge.
These ancient scrolls show us a totally different side of history than we're used to.
मैटर था करके अभी वालिस औजदा ने वादन सबेरी हुए ज़लिया है जतन यो सांस टीके भी निके बहुत सभी
If you want to dive deeper, read translations alongside scholarly commentary, visit curated exhibits, and support ethical preservation efforts. The story of the Gnostic Gospels rewards patient attention. The more closely we read, the richer and stranger the past becomes.